Joining us now is Dave Miller, Senior Manager of Media Relations for Spire. Dave, thank you for being on with us on At Issue. Texting and driving, it's a problem around the country, as we've said. What level of corporate responsibility does a company like Spire have as it relates to this issue?
Well, we've been a leader in educating and encouraging consumers to use their mobile devices in a safe and responsible manner for the last 2 decades, and really since we've been in business since 1988. But particularly in the last 15 years, we've had a variety of efforts, both directly as we sell devices to consumers, educating them about the safe use and the appropriate use of them, and then also through programs where we reach young people who are just beginning to get their licenses and start to drive. And of course, 2007 marked the start of the smartphone revolution with the introduction of the first iPhone, and that's really where we saw a huge uptick in the amount of mobility use for these types of devices. And so we've been partnering with the Mississippi Highway Patrol and the Department of Public Safety to do in-school workshops to help educate these students and young people about the appropriate use of these devices. Today, what we've been doing is we've actually, whenever we sell a device, we actually include this little card, and whether it's selling the device directly in one of our retail stores or whether it's selling it online and you receive the device in a box, we use all these types of reminders to help educate people and remind them that there is an appropriate way to use your phone and it's not texting and driving.
Just one more reminder, and when you talk about going into schools, it sounds almost like the efforts early on with kids to say don't use drugs, don't drink and drive, and this seems to be becoming a part of that lesson.
It very much so, and it's very much of an iterative process where I think one of the most effective methods we found was we had a lot of first-person testimonials from teenagers their own age who had gotten into circumstances where they had been involved in an incident with distracted driving, either where they committed it themselves or they were victims of it. Mm-hmm. I think those were really very powerful and sort of drove home the reality that we all need to be responsible in how we use these devices.
Has Spire worked with the legislature in crafting legislation to do something about this?
We've actually supported legislation on a number of occasions. In fact, we've consistently been supportive of legislation that calls for the responsible use of your device, and certainly texting and driving is not a responsible use. So we've supported legislation that's tried to deal with that problem on a broad basis.
And what exactly is the legislation that's currently in effect, and do you think it's strong enough?
The legislation that's currently in effect is basically a civil fine up to $100. On July 1st, the law changed and it went from $25 to $100. And the responsibility is upon law enforcement. If they observe an individual who's driving erratically or they see firsthand that they've been texting and driving, they can stop that vehicle and then make a determination then on whether they're going to cite them or not. That's what's on the books today. That covers everyone, whether you're a teenager, whether you've just got a permit, or you're an adult and you've got a license.
Do you think that's adequate?
It's a good first step. We were, I believe Mississippi was the 45th state in the country to adopt a distracted driving law, and that applied to everyone. And
because initially the law applied only to new drivers and young drivers.
That's right. The law applied to bus drivers. The first law applied only to bus drivers and young people who had learner's permits, I think 15 years old and younger. So this law applies to everyone, and we think that's certainly a good expansion. We think that we just need to continue to look at the issue. If this law is not dealing with the problem the way it should, then we certainly would be supportive of taking another look at it and seeing if there's something else that could be done to be more effective. At the end of the day, though, it's a personal choice and personal responsibility, and that's why we've stressed so much the education part of it. Everybody has to realize that it's not just using the phone, in ways that aren't appropriate, but you're behind a wheel of a vehicle that's several thousand pounds, and you can do tremendous damage in a very short period of time.
We've discovered that there are law enforcement officers out there who simply aren't writing tickets for this. Doesn't that concern you?
Well, I think again, as we talked about earlier, this is an iterative process. I think what's happening is we were very encouraged that we took the step where we were actually regulating this type of conduct at all in Mississippi, and that regulation applied to everyone. So I think that it's a good first step. We certainly need to take a look at how it's being enforced, whether it can be enforced, what the effectiveness of all of that is, and most importantly, whether it's having an effect on the kind of behavior that we want to change, because that's really what the law was written to try to achieve.
Does C Spire support strengthening the law to make the penalties harsher and to make the officers write more tickets for it?
I think if we can demonstrate that, I don't know if there's been a direct correlation demonstrated between harsher penalties and changing of behavior. I think what we found is more impactful for changing behavior is those first-person accounts. In fact, some of the legislators, lawmakers that actually supported the 2015 bill that was signed into law by Governor Bryant, they cited personal instances where they had either family members or friends of family who were either involved directly with a distracted driving case or were victims of a distracted driving case. So we think that's really where ultimately this problem is going to be resolved.
Do you think it would go too far to suggest that cell phone use should be banned altogether in moving vehicles?
I think that there's an appropriate place for use of mobile devices. There's tremendous benefit. Obviously, we have law enforcement agencies that use them. They're obviously there to protect us. We have situations where if we were talking earlier about being stranded on a road and your car conks out on you and you need to be able to call for a tow truck. If you've been involved in an accident or you've been the victim of a crime, having access to that mobility and that mobile communication is really beneficial and is shown to be able to save lives. So there are some really strong benefits to this. So we wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say there should be an outright ban.
What more do you think the company can do to do something about this problem?
Well, we're going to continue to do what we've done. We think this is effective, keeping the message out there, refreshing it, trying to reach the audiences that we need to reach in new ways that are relevant to them, that are compelling, that get that message across. I think that's what we're going to continue to do. We've done public service announcements. We did one in 2010 with Dexter McCluster when he was running back at Ole Miss and is now playing in the NFL for the San Diego Chargers. And we did a 30-second public service announcement with him. It was kind of fun engaging with the millennial generation, using rap to kind of get that message across. And again, it's about education. It's about taking personal responsibility. And we believe if we can use those kinds of tactics, we'll be effective in the end.
Is it a generational thing? I used to think that only young people texted until I got a text from my mother and I realized, well, now this has sort of transcended a lot of that. But as far as this issue is concerned, is it more important to reach out to young people to get them to stop texting and driving, or do you see it across all age groups?
I think it's across all age groups. The reason why there's a lot of focus on young people is because there's a very much of a psychological aspect that goes on where as you're younger, you don't necessarily think about safety and your personal welfare as much. You feel like there's a different plane that you're operating on, and as you get older, it seems like those kinds of cognitive recognitions come to bear more. So we focused on that part of the population more than, say, others, but this applies to all adults. If you're an adult, you need to act responsibly when you're using these types of devices.
Well, you mentioned when smartphones first came out, and when mobile phones first became very so prolific, so now ubiquitous, we talked about the dangers of just using a phone and not concentrating on the road. Then it moved over into texting, and now you have mapping programs and all the other things that a smartphone offers that are all useful programs. But aren't all of these new programs simply more potential distractions for a driver?
They can be, and a lot of this technology is being actually integrated into automobiles now. You know, there used to be a Garmin application that you could put on your visor or whatever, and now a lot of that technology that's in the smartphone is being integrated directly into a mini computer inside the car. So hopefully, again, if those applications are used with responsibility, there won't be that kind of distraction involved. But any time that a technology is used in a way that it's not intended to be used, it can be potentially a distraction.
Does Spire offer apps or parental controls that can be placed on the phone to prevent texting and driving or other activity on the phone from happening in a car?
There's a lot of applications out there. We don't specifically provide one ourselves, but there are lots of applications out there that allow parents, if they're concerned about how their young teenagers are using their devices, when they're using them, how they're using them, whether they're actually using them in the car or not. iPhone has basically a tracker now that allows you to see where the person is. I mean, all you have to do is have access to that account, and you can find out where that iPhone is.
We talk about laws. We talk about reaching out to young people, personal stories of issues people have had or tragedies they've experienced. But at the end of the day, doesn't this all come back down to personal responsibility and making smart decisions when you're driving a car?
Absolutely. I can remember when I first learned how to drive, I was absolutely terrified of not doing the right thing at the right time and somehow getting into an accident. And I think there's an element of that we lose as we get more comfortable and more familiar with driving. And there's some assumptions that we make. And it's only as we get, as we age and maybe get into our 60s and 70s where the physical acuities aren't as much as they were, say, before, that we begin to come back to that. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to think that through education and through these kinds of programs that Spire has, that we can actually help people understand that at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. It is personal responsibility. We have to understand that when you're driving, that's a full-time job. It's not a part-time job. It's a full-time job, and you have to pay attention to your surroundings. And the insurance companies talk all the time about defensive driving, but it's really about being aware of your surroundings, being aware and anticipating. And there's all this talk about self-driving cars, and I can't go into all that, but basically all the algorithms that are being written to basically tap into the mind and all the decisions that people make as they're out driving. So I would say personal responsibility has got to be the number one thing that we stress, we emphasize, and all these programs to educate people ultimately result in.
Dave Miller of Spire, thank you for your time.
Thank you.